Your alarm goes off before the sun does. You reach for your phone in the dark. You are already behind. And underneath that feeling sits an assumption you have never once stopped to examine. An assumption so old and so quiet that it feels less like an opinion and more like a law of physics. That this is simply what being human costs. You assume your ancestors had it worse. You picture them scraping at frozen ground, chasing animals that outran them, crawling into a cave at nightfall, half-starved, waking up to do it all again. You picture survival as a job with no weekends and no end, but the real answer is far stranger. For most of human history, your ancestors worked fewer hours than you do. They slept more. They talked more. They spent more of their waking life in the physical company of other people than almost anyone alive today. And the strangest part is that this is not a fantasy invented by people who romanticize the past. It is what researchers found when they walked into the desert with notebooks and stopwatches and simply counted. So what did ancient humans actually do all day? In 1963, an anthropologist named Richard B. Lee moved into the Dobe region of the Kalahari Desert. He lived among the Juhansi, a people who fed themselves the way humans fed themselves for tens of thousands of years before anyone planted a seed on purpose. Lee did not ask them how hard they worked. People are terrible at estimating that. Instead, he watched. He recorded who left camp, what time they left, what time they came back, and what they carried. The number he came back with was about 17 hours a week. 17, not 17 hours of easy work. 17 hours of getting food in a desert with a bow and a digging stick. Lee later added in the rest of it, the tool repair, the food processing, the hauling of firewood and water, and the total climbed to somewhere around 40 hours. But look closely at what those 40 hours contained. There was no commute. There was no line between the work and the life. The person cracking nuts was sitting in a circle of other people, talking, holding somebody's baby, laughing at an impression of a warthog. Does that sound like your 40 hours? In 1972, the anthropologist Marshall Solins took Lee's numbers and a stack of similar field data and wrote some things that detonated inside his own field. He called hunter-gatherers the original affluent society. His point was simple and uncomfortable. There are two roads to affluence. You can produce an enormous amount, or you can want a manageable amount. Your civilization took the first road and has been sprinting down it for 10,000 years. Your ancestors took the second one without ever deciding to, because a person who walks for a living cannot own anything they are not willing to carry. Sit with that. Every object you own is a thing you have to clean, store, insure, maintain, upgrade, and eventually throw away. They carried what fit on their bodies. But here is where the story gets complicated and where most people telling it stop far too early. Because a life with more free time was not a life with less effort. In 2012, a biological anthropologist named Herman Poncer went to Tanzania to measure the Hadza, one of the last populations on Earth still living substantially by hunting and gathering. He used a method called doubly labeled water, which tracks with real precision how much energy a human body burns in a day. He expected the Hadza to be furnaces. They walk for hours, they dig tubers out of ground like concrete, they climb trees for honey. Nobody among them has ever sat in a chair. The result stopped him cold. The Hadza burned roughly the same number of calories per day as an adult sitting in an office in Chicago or London. Same body size, wildly different lives, nearly identical daily energy. Poncer's conclusion, now called the constrained total energy expenditure model, is that your body defends a budget. Move more and it quietly spends less somewhere else, on inflammation, on stress hormones, on background maintenance you never see. Your metabolism is not a bank account you can drain. It is a thermostat. So if the calories were the same, what was actually different? The shape of the day. Poncer's colleague David Reichland measured how the Hadza move rather than how much they burn. They average around 75 minutes a day of moderate to vigorous activity, more than 10 times what a typical adult in a wealthy country manages and far beyond what any health guideline asks of you. But the deeper finding is what happens in between. The Hadza almost never sit the way you sit. When they rest, and they rest often, they squat or kneel or perch on their heels. Muscle stays loaded. Reichland called it active rest. Their bodies show it. Blood pressure that does not climb with age. Almost no measurable heart disease. Arteries that look decades younger than they should. They were not exercising, they were simply never still and never wrecked. Now picture the real day. It starts before sunrise, because there is no reason for it not to. There is talk around a fire, mostly about nothing, then the camp splits. A group of women, usually with children and at least one grandmother, walks out to a stand of baobab trees or a patch of ground where the tubers are. This is not a supporting role. In most foraging societies ever studied, gathered plant food supplied the majority of the calories reliably every single day, while hunting delivered spectacular feasts separated by long stretches of nothing. The men leave with bows. Most days they fail. Among the Hadza, an individual hunter brings home a large animal on roughly 3% of hunting days. 3%. Which means the entire system only functions because of a rule your economy would find insane. When meat arrives, it is given away. All of it. Immediately. Not out of sweetness, but because a carcass rots in a day and a favor lasts for years. The whole camp is a savings account made of other people. Does anything in your life work like that? Then there is the grandmother. In the 1980s, the anthropologist Kristen Hawkes noticed something strange while watching the Hadza forage. The hardest working people in camp, measured in hours, were often women well past the age of having children. They dug tubers all day and handed most of it to their grandchildren. Hawkes built this into what is now called the grandmother hypothesis, the argument that human women evolved a long life after fertility ends because older women feeding young children allowed mothers to have babies faster and allowed those babies to live. Your unusually long lifespan may exist because of unpaid childcare. By mid-afternoon, the food is back. The processing happens in a group in the shade while people talk. Tools get fixed, arrows get straightened, somebody sleeps, and then the sun goes down, and something happens that almost nobody thinks about. In 2014, the anthropologist Polly Wiesner published a study built from decades of recordings and notes she had gathered among the Juhuansi. She had 174 transcribed conversations. She sorted them by a single variable. Was it daylight or was it night by the fire? The daytime conversations were exactly what you would expect from any group of humans anywhere. Logistics. Who is going where, what the plan is. And an enormous volume of complaint, criticism, gossip, and conflict, more than a third of all daytime talk, the endless friction of people who cannot get away from each other. At night by firelight, the content flipped almost completely. 81% of the recorded night conversations were stories, not planning, not arguing. Stories about people who were far away or long dead or entirely imaginary. Stories that put a listener inside another person's mind and kept them there for an hour. Wiesner's argument is that firelight did not just extend the working day. It created a second kind of day, one that daylight is bad at, where the mind stops solving problems and starts rehearsing other lives. So the answer to what ancient humans did all day is not really a schedule. They walked several miles, they gathered reliable food and occasionally caught spectacular food. They repaired things with their hands, they raised children collectively instead of privately. They rested often and almost never alone, and then they spent hours in the dark, telling each other stories. Now the part that has to be said because the alternative is a lie, this life was not paradise. A brutal share of children died before the age of 5. A broken leg could be a death sentence. Violence within and between groups was real and in some populations accounted for a shocking fraction of all deaths. There was no way to stop an infection. There were bad seasons, and in bad seasons people went hungry. Your ancestors were not happier than you because their lives were gentle. Their lives were not gentle, but the shape of their scarcity was the exact inverse of yours. They were short on calories and long on time. You are drowning in calories and starving for time. They faced dangers that were sudden, physical, and obvious. And you face dangers that are slow, invisible, and easy to deny. Their work had an edge, a moment when the water was hauled and the tuber was dug and the day's demand was simply met. Nothing in your day has an edge. There is always another message. There is always something you could be optimizing. The work does not end. It only gets interrupted by sleep. And what have you done with the hours you clawed back? You have more leisure than a medieval peasant, and it does not feel like leisure, because rest chopped into 4-minute fragments and spent alone with a screen does not register in the nervous system as rest at all. You do have a fire. It glows on your face at night, exactly like the old one did. But it talks at you and never listens, and it tells you stories about strangers who will never learn your name. You were built by a few 100,000 years of the other arrangement. Long walks, constant low movement. A dozen people always within earshot. Food that arrived and was finished, darkness that arrived and was shared. None of that is nostalgia, it is a specification. So tomorrow, your alarm will go off before the sun does, and you will feel behind before your feet touch the floor. Your ancestors woke before the sun too. That was never the difference. The difference is that when their work was done, it was done, and the evening belonged to the fire, and the fire belonged to everyone sitting around it. The question was never how they survived the day. The question is when you decided the day was allowed to survive you.